I was 16 when I first realized I was drowning. Not in water, I'd been swimming competitively since. I was 8, but in the suffocating expectation that loving boys was supposed to feel natural. While my friends swooned over basketball players and debated prom dates, I found myself stealing glances at Sarah Martinez in AP biology, memorizing the way her laugh sounded like wind chimes, wondering why her smile made my chest feel like it was caving in and expanding all at once. That summer, floating in my family's backyard pool at midnight, staring up at stars that seemed to hold secrets I wasn't ready to understand, I made myself a promise. I would learn to hold my breath long enough to survive in a world that demanded I love differently than my heart knew how. What I didn't know was that 20 years later, a woman named Elena would teach me that survival and living were two completely different things, and that sometimes you have to stop holding your breath to finally learn how to breathe. The summer I turned 16, I spent every night in our pool after my parents went to bed. The water was warmer than the air, and something about being submerged made the confusion in my chest feel manageable, contained. I'd hold my breath and sink to the bottom, letting the chlorinated silence wash over thoughts I wasn't ready to name. Sarah Martinez had been my lab partner for 3 months when it happened. We were dissecting a frog in assignment that made half the class gag while we worked with steady hands. She was explaining the circulatory system, her finger tracing the tiny vessels with scientific precision, when she looked up and caught me staring. Not at the frog. At her, Earth to Alex, she'd laughed, and the sound hit me like a physical thing. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I had seen a ghost, the ghost of who I was supposed to be. Because in that moment, watching Sarah's dark eyes crinkle with amusement, her mouth curved in that half smile she saved for private jokes, I understood with terrifying clarity that everything I'd been told about love and attraction and the natural order of things was wrong. At least for me. That night, I floated on my back in the pool, arms spread wide like I was trying to embrace the whole sky. The stars looked different somehow, brighter, more distant, like they were part of a conversation I'd never been invited to join. I tried to imagine kissing Tommy Richardson, who'd asked me to junior prom. The thought felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit, scratchy and uncomfortable and fundamentally wrong. Then I imagined kissing Sarah. The thought sent me straight to the bottom of the pool, lungs burning, desperate to escape the intensity of wanting something I'd been taught was impossible. When I finally surfaced, gasping and crying in the blue-lit darkness, I made myself a promise that would shape the next 20 years of my life. I would learn to want the right things. Even if it killed me. My mother found me there an hour later, still floating, still crying. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" "Nothing, Mom. Just thinking about college applications." She accepted the lie because it was easier than the truth. We were both drowning, in our way her, in the expectations of suburban motherhood. Me in the growing certainty that I would never be the daughter she'd imagined. But that night, we just stood there in our respective depths, pretending the water was fine. I married David 3 weeks after college graduation in a ceremony that looked perfect in photographs. White dress, church full of smiling relatives, reception where everyone danced to songs about forever. I smiled until my cheeks ached and told myself this was what happiness felt like: safe, predictable, socially acceptable. Our wedding night, I stared at the ceiling of our honeymoon suite while David slept beside me and wondered if other women felt this hollow after achieving their supposed dreams. The sex was fine, pleasant, even, but it felt like performing a role in a play I'd never auditioned for. I kept waiting for the overwhelming passion I read about in books, the earth-moving connection that justified building an entire life around another person. It never came. Instead, I built a fortress of normalcy, teaching water aerobics at the community center, hosting dinner parties where David and I played the part of the happy couple, decorating our house with throw pillows and wall art that screamed functional adult. I became an expert at deflecting questions about when we'd have children, at smiling through stories about other people's romantic revelations, at drowning out the persistent whisper in my chest that insisted I was living the wrong life. The closest I came to acknowledging the truth was during our 5th anniversary trip to Mexico. We were at a beachside restaurant when our waitress, a woman about my age with sun-streaked hair and laugh lines, complimented my earrings. She had this way of looking at me, direct and appreciative, that made my skin feel electric. When she brushed my shoulder while setting down my drink, I excused myself to the bathroom and cried for 10 minutes, overwhelmed by a longing I couldn't name. "You seem different," David said later as we walked along the beach. "Different how?" "I don't know. Sad, maybe? Like you're always thinking about something else." He wasn't wrong. I was always thinking about something else, specifically about the life I might have lived if I'd been braver at 16. That bravery felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. I had a mortgage, a reputation, a carefully constructed identity that would crumble if I acknowledged what I'd spent 12 years trying to bury. "Just tired," I told him. And he accepted it because we'd both become experts at accepting easy explanations for complicated feelings. That night, I dreamed about drowning. In the dream, I was back in my childhood pool, but now it was ocean deep and filled with all the words I'd never said, all the desires I'd never acknowledged. I woke up gasping, and for a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or who I was supposed to be. Elena appeared in my Tuesday evening water aerobics class like an answer to a question I'd forgotten I was asking. She moved through water like she'd been born in it, each stroke deliberate and graceful. And when she introduced herself with that slight Spanish accent, something in my chest that had been sleeping for 18 years suddenly woke up. "First time doing this," she said, gesturing at the group of chattering women in the shallow end. Her smile was crooked, self-conscious, and I had to grip my clipboard to keep from reaching out to touch her face. "Water aerobics can be intimidating," I managed, falling back on instructor autopilot while my brain short-circuited. "But you look like a natural swimmer. I grew up in Costa Rica. The ocean teaches you things that pools cannot." The way she said it like water held secrets I'd never considered made me want to ask what those things were. Instead, I blew my whistle and started class, hyper-aware of Elena's presence in the water, the way she moved with confidence while following my instructions with careful attention. After class, she stayed behind to swim laps while I cleaned up. This became my routine, me gathering pool noodles and foam weights while stealing glances at her, cutting through the water with powerful strokes. Her occasionally pausing at the pool's edge to make conversation that felt charged with something I couldn't identify. "Your husband," she said one evening in November, "does he swim?" The question caught me off guard. We'd never discussed personal lives beyond surface pleasantries. "David?" "No, he thinks chlorine is bad for your skin." I tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. "He thinks a lot of things I love are impractical." Elena pulled herself up to sit on the pool's edge, water streaming from her dark hair. "And what do you think?" "About what?" "About loving impractical things." The question hung between us like a challenge. I looked at Elena, really looked, and saw something in her eyes that made my knees weak. Recognition, understanding, permission, I think, I said carefully. "That practical doesn't always mean alive." "No," she agreed softly. "It doesn't." That night, I went home and stood in my kitchen, looking at the life David and I had built together: clean countertops, coordinated appliances, a refrigerator covered in save-the-dates for other people's weddings, and felt like I was visiting a museum exhibit titled "How Straight People Live." Everything was correct, appropriate, exactly what it should be, and none of it felt like mine. The kiss happened on a Tuesday in December when Elena convinced the front desk attendant to let us have the pool to ourselves. She brought wine and said something about teaching me to breathe underwater, and before I knew it, we were floating in the deep end, her hands on my waist, my world turning upside down in the space between one heartbeat and the next. I can't, I whispered against her lips, even as my body contradicted every word by pulling her closer. You already are, she replied, and she was right. I was kissing her like I was drowning, like she was air, like 18 years of holding my breath had finally become unbearable. What followed wasn't the dramatic affair of movies or the guilt-ridden secret of suburban fantasies. It was something far more dangerous, a slow, careful education in what it meant to want something with your whole body, your whole heart, your whole complicated, messy, beautifully human soul. Elena didn't push me to leave, David, or demand declarations of love, or ask for anything except honesty about what I was feeling. Instead, she taught me things, how to say what I wanted without apologizing for it, how to recognize the difference between guilt and conscience, how to trust that wanting something didn't make me selfish or broken or wrong. Tell me about the first woman you loved, she said one evening as we sat by her apartment's small balcony pool, feet dangling in the warm water. Sarah Martinez. I was 16. She had this laugh that sounded like ... I paused, searching for the right words. Like coming home to a place you've never been but always belonged. What happened? I spent the next 18 years trying to convince myself it was just friendship, admiration, anything. But what it actually was. Elena's hand found mine underwater, our fingers interlacing like they'd been designed to fit together. And what was it actually? The beginning of everything I was too scared to become. The night I finally told David. It wasn't dramatic or angry or full of recriminations. It was honest in a way our marriage had never been. And when he said he'd suspected for months that he'd been waiting for me to figure out what he'd already known, I realized we'd both been drowning in different ways. I hope she makes you happy, he said as I packed a few things that felt truly mine. Really happy. The kind of happy you deserve. Moving in with Elena felt like learning to use lungs I'd never known I had. Her apartment was chaos books in 3 languages, art supplies everywhere, plants that thrived despite her claims of having a black thumb, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I could breathe deeply without worrying about taking up too much space. 5 years later, Elena and I are married in a ceremony that looks nothing like my first wedding and everything like us bare feet in the sand. Vows we wrote ourselves about courage and authenticity and the revolutionary act of choosing love over fear. I still teach swimming, but now to kids who need to learn that water can be freedom instead of just another place to follow rules. Sometimes I think about that 16-year-old girl floating in her parents' pool, making promises about survival that nearly killed her. I want to tell her that holding your breath isn't the same as swimming, that sometimes the scariest thing you can do is also the thing that saves your life. If you're holding your breath, waiting for permission to want what you want, this is it. This is your permission. The water's warm and you already know how to float. All you have to do is stop drowning and start swimming, ready to dive deeper into stories that celebrate authentic love and late-blooming courage. Follow for more tales of women who chose authenticity over safety, passion over propriety, and the messy, beautiful truth over comfortable lies.